Hello, and welcome to the Heal Your Heart, Heal Your Life podcast, the podcast where we talk all things we've survived through, whether that be trauma, life lessons, and most importantly, how we've healed. In the hopes that if there's a listener out there somewhere going through the same thing and they're feeling lost on what they can do to heal their hearts, they can come to this podcast to hear inspiring stories from people who've lived through what they're going through. You are seen, you are heard, and you are loved here. So today I'm really excited to invite Lauren Evans onto the podcast. She's a badass women's coach. She's also my dear friend. I was lucky enough to meet her at a retreat we did on being the wild woman. So I feel like we are definitely qualified to talk about finding your voice after that. And yeah, she's just an all-around amazing human. And I just look forward to, sharing her story on this podcast. Welcome. Has anything come up in the lead up to this podcast around finding your own voice?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I mean, definitely, I've been thinking about the journey that I've been on. I've also been asking myself the question as to whether I've actually found my voice or
Mm,
not.
interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know what the answer is to that. I think that I'm constantly finding my voice. I don't think that it's ever fully found.
Yeah, it's like an ever-evolving journey, right?
Yeah,
Mm,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so I did have a bit of reflection on, yeah, I guess like why and I guess like where I started finding my voice.
mm,
Yeah. So I guess I was thinking back to when I last had my voice, I guess before I lost it, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, so I was thinking back to childhood and I was like so quirky,
Mm,
but so myself, so confident.
yeah.
And like I would wear aluminium mini skirts that I made.
Oh,
And like I would plait wool into my hair just because I don't know why, because I
cool.
wanted to. Um, it
Revolutionary.
it was pretty weird, but you know, cool. I love weird.
Mm,
Um, and I think, like a lot of people, I lost that in high school.
yeah.
Um, that's definitely where I started to make myself small.
Mm,
Um, yeah, and make, I guess, like wanting to conform.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, in so many ways, like physically, um, literally trying to make myself small.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And yeah, just I guess squashing down my voice and my truth
Mm,
because I didn't want to stand out.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Even when I went through my emo phase, I still think that was conforming.
To a degree. We've both been through emo phases. I love that.
Yeah, that's so good. Um, yeah, and I think that extended, into adulthood, into
Mm,
the workplace when then I wanted to excel in the workplace, um, and wanted to. I thought that excelling was conforming.
yeah, yeah, that makes a lot
Um,
of sense.
yeah.
What do you think
So
conforming gave you when you were able to
mm,
do it and squashing down your voice in the
it,
process?
safety.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's such a safety in not being called out for being
Mm,
different. Um, and it's comfortable,
yeah, yeah.
like being hidden, I think.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think the impact of like high school and bullying and trying to be cool and navigate that whole space, like it can be just such a soul crusher for all of us. And yeah, trying to find that sense of safety in that space of like, I need to be a certain way, I need to look a certain way, I need to conform and act in a certain place could definitely be a huge catalyst for us shutting our voice down. Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, the act of having a voice is to stand out, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. And it's scary.
definitely. I would love to hear, like, was there a turning point where you
Yeah.
felt like something had to shift and you decided to go on that journey of finding your voice from the conforming journey?
hmm Yeah. So I would say that this started to happen in like maybe my mid 20s.
Mm,
I was feeling so like overwhelmed. I
yeah.
remember just because the problem with conforming and like people pleasing as well
Mm,
is you're having to look at everyone around you, read what their emotions are, read what they need from you, and then give that to them, right?
yeah,
Which is so exhausting.
definitely. And then you could still get
Yeah.
it wrong.
Yes, yes. And then you have to like fix that.
Mm,
Yeah.
a constant
Um,
battle.
yeah. And I was like really in that I guess like um cycle of doing that. And I just remember this moment when I was managing like a really large team
Yeah.
and like 25 people.
Wow.
And I think so much of leadership is like kind of reading the people that you're leading and like understanding them and giving them what they need, which is important. But
Yeah.
then when it goes over into that sort of people pleasing area,
Mm,
then if you have 25 people that you're doing that for, as well as say like the bosses above you and all that kind of thing,
yeah.
you're breaking yourself into so many little parts
Yeah.
and yeah, just like fragmenting yourself, I guess. So I remember sitting at my desk and it must have been a particularly hectic day where I'd been, really doing that and also making decisions then as well. And then
Mm,
my decisions were quite out of alignment because I'm making decisions based on what other people want, not what is
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And I just remember feeling like completely overwhelmed, completely drowning,
Mm,
and tapped out, and just thinking this something needs to give.
yeah.
I need to understand who I am when
Yeah.
when other people's emotions are taken out of the mix, and I need to understand how to shield myself from other people's feelings and and ground myself, I
Definitely.
guess.
Mm,
Um, yeah, so that's probably like that was a really pivotal moment, and
yeah.
I'm sure like all these things, there's so many different pivotal moments that I can also think of, but yeah, I think that was really the start of doing a lot of like self development and working
Mm,
on understanding who I am, which I think is key in finding your voice. You need to know who you are. So
definitely.
like my core values, so that I could use them as a compass. Um, yeah, I needed to discover who I was, and then the voice followed
Yes.
because I could ground myself into that. That was my anchor point in, you know, once I knew who I was and where I was going, I could then speak to that and stand up for that,
Mm, mm,
and set boundaries around that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important point you've made there. And I've just written a note because I'm like, that's fascinating. I need to think about that more. Um, that when you're in the midst of the people pleasing and trying to give yourself away and be all the things to all the people, like sometimes you're so deep in it that you even forget, like, what do I actually want? And I used to make a joke to my friend back in mental health when I used to work there of like, I need like one of those, what would Jesus do wristbands of like, what do I actually want? Just to remind me on the daily of like, am I doing this for me or am I doing this for everyone else right now? Like, why am I doing this? And is it in alignment with my values? Such a
Yeah.
huge lesson. And yeah, how can you possibly have a voice and stand for something if you don't have a basis of who you are without the influence of the world around you? Mm,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I love that.
Hmm.
What were the steps you took to start to break that down and kind of find yourself? Like, was there anything specific
Mm.
you can think back to that you might have done?
Did so many things. I think the first thing that came to mind was I did an actual core values exercise.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which I love, and I've done with lots of other people since then,
Mm,
where you literally just have a whole bunch of words, and then you have like three questions that you ask.
yeah.
I can't remember exactly what the questions were, but it's sort of like, do do you use this to make decisions? Or,
Mm.
has this like guided you and like, things that have really mattered before in the past? And
Yeah.
these three questions really eliminate a lot of the words from that,
Interesting.
from the list, and then you end up with basically three that have been tested against
Mm.
all the other words and have been tested against these questions.
Great.
Some the ones that came up for me were intuition, creativity, and empathy.
Excellent.
Um, and I did a lot of reflection on what happens within me when I'm out of alignment with those values. So for me,
Yeah.
resentment shows up, and that's like an inner child thing, which is just I've become like a sort of tantrumy, like it's everyone else's fault sort of thing when
Mm.
I'm out of alignment. Um, so I just first started noticing like practicing, like, oh, okay, like what's coming up for me here if I'm, for example, doing something which my intuition is telling me not to do, like how is that playing out for me? And what
Yeah.
happens when I do listen to my intuition? And I was like, whoa, it feels so good. Or what
Yeah.
happens when I like carve out creativity time in my day or
Mm.
apply more creativity to the decision making that I'm doing. And like looking for areas of my life where that was lacking and applying it, and like suddenly it becomes so much more beautiful, so much more colorful because I've applied that thing that matters actually so much to me. um I worked with a executive coach. I read a lot of books. um One of them around self-love was, I think it's called Gay Hendricks, Learning to Love Yourself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Have you read it?
No, I haven't actually, but I probably should considering my line of work.
It was just, when you have those books that like you always remember as a
Yes.
real aha. Yeah, that was one of those books where um I learned how to love myself.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
What did that
which
entail?
so the biggest takeaway was this idea that whatever feeling you're feeling in the moment, even if it's hating yourself, or whatever it is, you can love yourself for having that feeling. So
Mm.
you can like recognize the feeling and say, like, I'm feeling guilt, right? And just let that guilt feeling happen. And
Yeah.
then go, I love myself for feeling guilt, and just feeling
Mm.
that like wrap around you. And then you're allowing yourself to feel the feeling of loving yourself, even in a time when you don't feel like you should.
Yes. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. That was super powerful message that
Mm.
changed my life, I think. Yeah.
Definitely, because how are you ever going to integrate those dark feelings if you're shaming them and going, "Oh, I shouldn't be feeling hate, like go away, go away, go away." It's like you can't
Mm,
just push it under the rug, like it's going to pop back up somewhere else. You've got to sit with it, which is the challenging part of the exercise for sure. And
yeah.
so how do you feel like learning to love yourself impacted your ability to have a voice and stand up for yourself?
I think it's the same as knowing yourself. Loving yourself is believing that, sorry, okay, so knowing yourself is knowing what you have to say, but
Hmm.
loving yourself is believing that your voice matters.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely, and, like, actually doing it because you might know what you need to say and be like, "Oh, no, 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 I won't say that because, whatever reason," but
Mm,
actually doing it and going, "I'm gonna say it anyway because I have my own back and I believe
mm,
in what I have to say and it needs to be said," like
yeah.
yeah, wow.
Yeah. And I think like for a really long time, I didn't think that I had anything important to say. And
Mm,
like learning that lesson that everyone has something important to say, like your voice really, really does matter.
yes.
Um, like I remember once sitting in a meeting and thinking, oh, I have an idea to contribute, but they've probably already thought of it. And it doesn't matter. Like it's not that big of a
Mm,
deal.
mm,
And then I sat there and sat there and sat there, and then when you get that feeling, well, I don't know if this is a universal experience, but every time when I'm about to speak, like speak my voice, I get like sweaty palms and a racing heart because it's scary. And like, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how many times I do, I always get it. And
Mm.
sometimes my body will start doing that before I've decided to talk. It's like my body's decided that I need to talk. And I'm like, oh,
Wow.
it's happening. It's going to come out sort of thing. And I
Yeah.
remember saying the idea and everyone was like, whoa, like mind blown. That's like the best idea I've ever heard. Um, and I was like, oh, wow, imagine if I hadn't have said that. And I mean, even
Yeah.
if it's not like that was, an extreme example where I was really surprised by everyone's reaction. But
Mm.
like, your everything that you have to say is
Yeah.
going to contribute in some way to the world in a positive, and keeping that inside yourself is just not fair to the world, I think.
Yes, for sure. Like, I think it's a beautiful example of like how speaking your truth and actually having a voice can be so positive as well. Like, I think we're so conditioned to think it's negative or like, oh, if I say something, they're not going to listen anyway, or like, I don't deserve to have a voice at this table. Or, when I was told as a child, like, be seen and not heard, like I need to take that on board for the rest of my life and adulthood for some, it's just, we have these stories and these patternings that just follow us through our life. But yeah, if you'd never shared that, your company never would have had access to that knowledge. And that's the whole point of having diversity in a room, is like we need people who think differently, because they're going to change the game, and things aren't going to always work when we do the same thing over and over again. So thank you for sharing that. It's a beautiful example. I really love that. I've got a question from before, but I just kind of let it go because we were flowing so naturally. Um, I'm really curious that one of your core values is empathy, and like how you navigate empathy and trying to bring that into your life more, or live by that, when you also have this people pleaser kind of in the background of that.
Such a good question. And I think it's such a challenge, honestly,
Mm,
because I think, yeah, empathy is connecting in with what someone is feeling
yeah.
and ultimately then what they may need. Um, and then absolutely my automatic reaction is to give them that because I want
Yeah.
to, like, I like helping people.
Mm,
Um, I think that what I've learned over time is there's this idea, and I can't remember who wrote about it, but it's like an idea in coaching where, and I'm not, you may have heard about it, but if people are dancing, right, and people are on the dance floor, you
mm,
can watch from the balcony or you can engage in the dance, and you can
mm,
still be there. If you're watching from the balcony, um, without engaging, you can still be there and hold space, and in my case, hold empathy for
yeah.
someone without fully engaging in the dance.
Mm,
And yeah, that's something that I have to like constantly ask myself, like, am I
yeah.
in the dance or am I on the balcony?
Mm,
Um, and I think that sort of, it gives me that little bit of distance to still align with my value and still be there,
yeah.
and show up, but not be fully immersed in their feelings
Mm,
or
mm.
emotions or whatever is, yeah, people pleasing.
Do you find that when you are fully immersed and you're in it, it's like it becomes a lot harder to find your voice in that space than when you're on the balcony, kind of taking a step back? You can kind of hold both in a way, especially
Yeah,
if they're
yeah.
they're differing. Like,
Yeah, exactly. I think that when I'm in the dance, I become them.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
You
I'm
just
just a
take on.
mirror. Whereas, yeah, when I'm on the balcony, I can help them step out of it also if that's what's needed. If
Yeah,
I can give
yeah,
them what they need more effectively, but also still preserve myself. I can also not drain myself in the
yeah,
experience.
yeah.
um, yeah, and we can be our own separate entities in the interaction, which is,
Mm,
like important for both of us.
definitely. That reminds me of sort of stories as well that you hear in the coaching world, or any world of self-development, I guess. Of like when you're trying to help someone, uh, and say the analogy is that they're drowning, right? And you're trying to help them. And it's like you have the choice of either to jump in the water, but maybe also drown alongside them, or stand back and throw a life raft and be like, I need you to jump on board this. And so it's a kind of co-creation, collaboration vibe instead of like, I'm going to run in there with you, but then maybe I don't know how to swim either because, then we're lost in that feeling of like, if you get too, especially as a counselor or someone, a therapist, someone along those lines, it's like you get too lost in the emotion, then suddenly no one's guiding the ship anymore. And it's like there's no one to kind of co-regulate and bring that person out of that experience because you're just both in the experience. And I know I've accidentally connected too hard with clients in the past where it's like this feeling of helplessness. And then I feel helpless and it's like, I don't know how to help them. And it's like, that's not helping anyone if I'm lost in that feeling. Like this whole session's over essentially. Like,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes. So I definitely think there's this shades of like, where is this value helping me in having my voice, if that is what I want to be doing? And maybe like, where is it hindering me and where can I rein it in a little bit, but still be able to utilize it, which that balcony analogy is great. It's like you're still there, you're still holding space,
Mm.
doing the thing, but you're just not quite as in it as you might have been if you'd let yourself go down.
Yeah, and I think that's why being aware of what it is, like, that that is my value, being aware of it then allows me to observe it and,
Yeah.
yeah, like control it, I guess, or use it effectively as opposed to just, I don't know, like everything happening to me.
Yeah, yeah, because like there's light and dark in everything, right? And every value and every trait we possess, for sure.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, so we're on this journey of like finding ourselves and learning a bit more. And um, was there anything else you wanted to share about how you were able to have a voice?
I think that I was asking myself whether it's become easier. So
Yeah,
like, I mean, I've done a lot of public speaking now, like sometimes in front of thousands of people, um, and now, and I'm talking about work a lot because this is actually like where it showed up for me a lot.
yeah,
My
mm,
relationship, it was a little bit like definitely I've become better at expressing my voice, and it has, you know, gone into all of my life. But I think work the workplace was such a like step, like the same thing as high school almost. So it was really playing out for me there.
yeah,
Um, and then also it's where I've been expressing my voice, you know, probably the loudest because I advocate for a lot of topics,
mm,
particularly women in the workplace, and like cultural change things. So they're all things like around change. So I have to like really, think
yeah,
about it. Um, and I was thinking, has it become, and like now I'm in these meetings, like making strategic decisions for the company and having to like really express, like not just my voice, but also the voice of the company and things like that.
yeah. Wow.
Um, but I don't think it's become easier. I think
Mm,
that it's just been practice. Like it still
yeah.
scares the shit out of me, to be honest. Like I'm so nervous every time. And I think the
Mm,
more I'm going to be expressing something which is true to me and valuable to me and like close to my heart, the more nervous I feel because it's so
yeah,
precious.
yeah,
And I think that's okay. I think I'm used to feeling that fear. It's not that I've overcome it. I'm just I'm used to having the sweaty palms and
mm,
I'm used
mm.
to um having the racing heart and I'm like, oh hey, like you're there. That's cool. Like in a way, I think it actually shows me that I'm about to do something which is really in alignment with what
Yeah.
I believe. And I'm just more comfortable with the discomfort of it, I think.
Definitely. I want to applaud your courage then every single time getting up there and doing the thing. And especially, I 100% resonate with like the things that are so close to your heart are even more scary to talk about because if you get shut down or if someone doesn't hear you, like it kind of has that personal element as well. Um, yeah, but it's a practice. It's not something that you just get overnight, you do once and then you never have to think about it ever again. It's something that comes up continuously. And I can relate to the feeling in the body of like, oh, this is something I feel like I need to speak on. And there's this part of me that wants to shrink away from that. But then there's this other part of me going, no, we need to do this.
Mm.
And that feeling does pop up for me every now and then, despite, yeah, feeling like I have a good grasp on my voice. Maybe not, it's not perfect, but nothing is. But yeah.
I'm actually really interested to hear your story as well, like how you've gone about finding your voice.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting you said yours was a lot of related to work because I feel like mine's been a lot related to relationships. So it's really cool that we've got like different areas where things have been flowing in.
Cool.
Yeah, when I think back of like struggling with my voice, I really, yeah, was a deep people pleaser back in the day. And really just felt like I would just go extremely quiet whenever like conflict would come up or something I didn't want to do, or really struggled to say no to people, really struggled to share what I had to say. And I think there was, yeah, deep wounds around, are people going to hate me if I speak up, or is this going to lead to conflict? And so I had a fear of conflict that underpinned everything. I also had people pleasing, which meant a fear of like not being loved or valued if I did speak up, and feeling like I had to put on that hat of whoever this person wanted me to be and constantly trying to adapt my image to that, similar to your high school experience. And yeah, like just this constant fear around it. And so I was actually ironically a singer in high school. So there was like this part of me that wanted to explore my voice and felt confident on a stage where I wasn't going to be challenged. But yeah, in my personal relationships, one on one even like was just a struggle, because there was this feeling of like if I share my truth, I will be hated for it, or I'll be hurt for it, or there will be something that comes up that isn't ideal. So I'll just shut that down, and then everyone's happy and then I'm happy. But then secretly I'm not, because I'm never really expressing myself.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I know boundaries for you, like you've, I think, become really good at setting
Mm,
boundaries. Was
mm.
that sort of like one of the first steps?
Yes and no. So when I think about it, I feel like and I have touched on this in other podcast episodes, so apologies if it's a repeat, but um, I had a lot of relational trauma come up around men not being great. And not to say that it's all men, but the wet headspace I was in, I just kept attracting people like that to me that were very disrespectful, would walk all over me, wouldn't want to hear my voice, wouldn't care about what I had to say, kind of thing, just wanted what they wanted and were very set in their own ways. And then that was obviously quite confronting for me at that time in my life, because I didn't have a voice and I didn't know how to speak up and do that in a safe way. And I was on this journey of like, I obviously have attraction to men, and that's something I want in my future. So I want this, but I'm also struggling to get it in a healthy way. And I need to learn how to do that in order to achieve my life goals. So that was kind of the start of this, without even realizing it did have something to do with my voice and my ability to speak up. Um, and I just remember being at this party uh, with my friends and stuff, and there was this guy and he was all over me and I didn't like him, and he like put his arm around me, and I just remember like looking at my friend, like telepathically being like, oh my God, please help me, get me out of here, I don't want to be here. But because I'd never said anything, the poor guy next to me had no idea I wasn't even interested. So he's going on doing his thing, and then my friend in front of me is looking at me like, well, this is fine. She hasn't said anything, right? Like nothing, I don't
Like,
need
why
to
is
save
she
her.
looking at? Why is she winking?
Why am I she giving me this weird look of like, oh my
Yeah.
God. Um and yeah, I went away from that party like upset and like sad and like, why did my friend save me? But when I really like delved deeper on it, it was like, without having a voice, I'm actually victimizing myself further. I
Mm,
thought it would be helpful for me to not have a voice to protect me, but it's actually making it worse, because I can't say no. And without saying no, people don't know where the line is, where the boundary is.
mm,
And I was like, shit, this is something I need to work on. Because I just wanted to shut down. I just was like panicking internally, but I'm really great at like looking like everything's fine on the outside,
mm,
as you are as a people pleaser. You
yeah.
become a great actress. um, so yeah, so that I think that was the real beginning of my journey, was like, I can't keep going like this because it's not working for me. I'm going out to bars and clubs and I'm attracting people who are triggering me left, right, and center. Like I need to know how to at least, yeah, hold that space for myself.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, then that kind of ended up on a whole journey of like unpicking this fear of conflict and unpicking my people pleasing and like this need to be loved so much that I'm willing to put my needs like so last. Um,
Mm,
because really, when I thought about it, it was like if someone really loves me, like I would want them to care about what I want as well. Like,
mm,
it doesn't have to be all about what I want, but it should be equal in some respect. And so that's when boundaries kind of came in. It was like, oh, how do I do this? Like, what do I need? And, you often hear boundaries in the therapy space of like, oh, your therapist going like, I think you need to work on some boundaries. And you're like, oh, what? Like, what does that even mean? And then, yeah, learning all about like how to say no, how to feel into your body and recognize the signs. I think that's really great that you shared about how sometimes your body just knows before your mind does.
mm,
Um, I think that's such a classical, like we've been so conditioned by society, especially as women, to put everyone else first, to put ourselves last, and just like do what needs to be done quietly in the background and not make
mm,
any conflict. Um, but yeah, it was so easy for me to never say anything and not have boundaries, and then being like, wow, you can actually do that. You can actually set a boundary and say, no, I don't feel comfortable with this and I refuse to do that. Like, what? That's a thing? Because I didn't have any role
mm,
models growing up who had strong boundaries. Like, I come from a long lineage of Italian women, who were very strong in their own right, but also really conditioned to, let the man lead and do all that stuff, and just not make any decisions or not kind of have their voices heard either. So it really feels like a cultural shift and like a I'm doing this for my ancestors as well as me as well thing. So yeah, so once I realized that, I kind of worked on the boundaries and kind of then it became like like let's just do one little bit more scary than yesterday, right? It doesn't have to be a lot. I don't have to step in and start using my boundaries like profusely like the next day. It's just like, okay, so I'm going to try and say no and see how that goes with a safe person. Like maybe it's my best friend. Say no when she
mm,
wants to go out and I'm exhausted from a day at work, because there would be that constant battle of like, oh, I should go because I don't want to upset her. I don't want to feel like I don't want to see her. And this like constant rhetoric in my mind of like all the things I should be doing versus what I actually want. And that's where it was so beautiful for you to share, like, what do you actually want? Like, what do you actually want? What do I need right now? Like, again, we're
yeah,
just so not taught how to do that. It's wild.
yeah,
Mm,
yeah. It's I thought it was so interesting what you were talking about at the start there, that where actually not having a voice can make it very unsafe, right?
mm,
Like
mm.
that. Yeah, I hadn't, yeah, thought of that recently, I think. And um, I'd, I'm interested to know, like, how did it feel when you first started saying no? Because you mentioned that like, it was, it was hard. Do you remember the first time you sort of said a sacred no?
Oh, I don't know if I remember the first time. I remember, yeah, I just needed to do it graded exposure. It was just like, so we'll do friends first, people who love me already, people who they're not going to just like shun me or whatever. And then it was like, okay, they've responded really well to my no, like kind of like with your voice, they've responded really
Mm,
well to my voice. Like, and it's just creating a new narrative of like, it's safe to say no. It is safe to put a
mm,
boundary down. It is okay for me to do this. And then, okay, now I'm going to do this with someone who's not a safe person, or now I'm going to do this with someone who is like an acquaintance, not really a proper friend
mm,
or something. And then my ultimate was like, now I'm going to say this to a man in a relational space.
mm,
Um, and I got so good at it that people started telling me, and especially family members who hadn't been on their own journey around this, was like, now you're too loud. Now you've got too much of a voice. You need to tone that down, which was also triggering in its own
mm,
right. But I'm just like, but they haven't done the work. Of course, they're going to see this loud, proud woman who's available to say, no, I'm not going to be treated like that, as a threat to they haven't their own work and their own narrative of like women can't be loud and women have to be quiet. And
yeah.
yeah, that's been its own journey in its own right. But yeah, just recognizing I want to be around friendships and people who respect my boundaries. And if you don't, I'm going to either have a conversation with you and see if we can patch that up, because sometimes people don't even realize they're pushing a boundary until it's been pushed. Like,
Mm,
again, it like without having a voice, it makes it really hard to communicate this stuff. And I always thought like, oh, how could they not know? How could they not see the disappointment on my face or whatever right now? Like, but people can't read people I think, as well as I expect them to sometimes. And yeah, sometimes it's about setting your friend aside and going, look, like, I appreciate that you called me when you got up because you're like, let's hang out. But also, I want food. I just want you to pick me up because I don't drive yet. And I've been like, "Oh, this feels a bit ick in my body, but I'll do it." And then I do it, and then I'm like, "I feel like you just used me to go get food. You didn't actually want to spend time with me." And that's a bit upsetting for me. And to actually sit down with my friend and go, "Look, I value our friendship so much. I'm gonna share this with you because I want to clear it." And I think
Mm,
reminding people that you're bringing this stuff up, you're having a voice and speaking into conflict because you want to heal things is super important as well, because
mm,
a lot of people just think, "Oh, you're bringing something up, like, you just hate me." And it's like, "No, no, no. I'm doing this because I do value our friendship, because if you were just an acquaintance and you did that to me, I might decide, oh, it's maybe not worth talking to them about it. But someone I really care
mm,
about, I want them to know where my boundaries are so that they can actually acknowledge them." And then that was a whole shift and journey of like, okay, are my friends actually acknowledging that, or are they not now? And then how do I respond to that as well?
mm,
But yeah, it was all baby steps with this stuff. The first, like, I'd try it, and then if people would shut me down, I wouldn't know what to do next, and I'd panic. So that was like the
mhm,
first little bit. I was like, okay, I'll try it. Oh, it didn't work. Okay. And then I was like, all right, so the next time I'm going to try it. And then if it doesn't work, I'm going to try again. And I'm just going to keep
mm,
going. And then if someone gets really mad at me, I'm going to like try and sit with that and acknowledge that it's not my fault that I've set a
mm,
boundary and they've gotten mad. Like, that's their stuff. That's not my stuff. So there was a lot of little lessons in between, obviously getting good at that kind of thing.
mm,
And now I feel like it's definitely not my comfort zone. It's not something I love to do, but yeah, I feel this niggle in my gut of like, oh, this is not okay. This person is, really pushing a boundary here. Or like I had something at work the other day where someone was just like fully going off at me. And I was like, this is a company thing that they've put a rule in place. I have no control over this. I can't
mm,
fix it for you. Like, so yelling at me is not going to save anything. Like,
mm,
you need to direct this elsewhere, or like, you need to look at this within yourself, or like why this is coming up for you, this kind of thing. And I set the boundary down with her and she really didn't like it. And it made our relationship a bit rocky for a little while. But I was like, I'm not going to be out of my own integrity of like, there's nothing I can do. I can't run around trying to fix things for you that I have no power over. So,
mm,
and we ended up fixing that relationship and we were fine after that. And it wasn't the end of the world, but I wanted her to know that, just kicking up and having a whole song and dance and yelling at me was not going to get her needs met any better than not than being polite. Because I think people realize like, oh, if I chuck a tantrum, no one's going to challenge me on that. So I'm just going to keep doing that and use that as a
mm.
strategy for the rest of my life, even though I'm a 50-year-old woman.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah. And I was like, I don't want to be manipulated by people who have big emotions. Like, that's not, yeah, it was always about manipulation for me. It was like, I have to take my power back. And the way I'm going to do that is by
Mm.
having a voice and setting a boundary.
Sometimes a few things came to mind when you were talking about. I think you made so many good points. Um, this idea that like people are going to be mad at us if we say no, and like that
Yeah.
sometimes people are mad at us,
Yeah.
and like sometimes it's so fine, right? Like sometimes you say no, and they're like, okay, and you're like, oh, I thought I was going to be fully
Yeah.
rejected by you because I said no. Um, but yeah, this like it's, I guess there's like two things that I wanted to ask you about around that people being mad, right? So,
Mm,
you mentioned your family kind of like saying, okay, this is too much now.
mm.
Um, so like, why is it like, what is it that is triggered in people when women speak up? Like what, it's like they
Yeah.
need to push us back down, right?
Mm,
Like
mhm.
what's happening there, do you think?
So what I've psychoanalyzed of my own family life scenario, um, what I think is happening there is like that person who is trying to push me back down has always pushed down their own voice, right? They've always been like, I need to speak up. Oh, but I was always told I'm not allowed to do that. And in order to still people please and be the good girl and whatever, I'm not going to have my own voice. I'm just going to shut down. If someone
Mm,
is coming at me, I'm just going to shut down. And then when they see someone else do that, it's like, you can't do that because I don't allow myself to do that, right? I shut myself down, and that's a lot of energy and a lot of work to do that. And I need to do that to protect myself and keep everyone safe. So if you do that, you're going to be unsafe and you're going to be unprotected, and it's out of my control then. So if I shut you down, then, you'll be safe. I think they just, their own perspectives just bleed onto you, and they just project it all onto you. It's like, how dare you have a voice when I have never been allowed to have one? And then you can't have one, because then people will come at you, and that's scary for me, and that's what stops me from having my voice. So therefore you're not allowed to have your voice, and I'm just going to call you bossy, or I'm going to label you as a bitch or something, because that's an easy way to bring you back down into that box. And I know it's going to land, and I know it's going to hurt you, and you're going to actually go, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, and question yourself. And it
Mm,
keeps you safe. But
mm,
the safety they're keeping you in is like a cage of comfort. It's not an enjoyable safety. It's like a safety where you have to give a part of yourself away in order to be liked.
yeah, yeah. And do you think it's a fabricated safety? Like, what are we being kept safe from?
That's a good question. I feel like there is aspects of, like, if you speak up, like, it could go bad. And I appreciate that. Um, but there's also aspects where it could go well. And I think people who haven't done this work and haven't identified they have a fear of conflict, and that they have a fear of, like, things not going well, they're always going to look at the negative worst case scenario of that situation, of like, it's unsafe, it's unsafe, it's unsafe. It's like, okay. And then I also think people who have a lot of anxiety, and their way of dealing with that is to control others, are going
Mm,
to have big things to say about you having a voice and things like that, because it's like, oh, you can't do that, because then you're like, someone might come at you, and like, I don't know how to handle this level of anxiety I'm sitting with right now, and I don't take personal responsibility. You're the problem, therefore I need to fix you and stop
mm,
you, and then I feel comfortable again. And it's like,
yeah.
I can't take on that level of responsibility for your emotions. Like, you need to hold that space, but people don't know how to, so it's so easy for them to just project.
Mm,
So it's a real tricky one. And I can appreciate that, and even myself, sometimes I do say, I, like, maybe in a fight or something, I'll attack someone and I'll say something that's probably a bit hurtful, and I do need to think about that. But if it's coming from a place of protecting myself, and it's what I need in that scenario to keep myself safe, instead of just attacking and blaming the other person, I'm
mm,
going to hold on to that, and I'm going to not let anyone take that away from me. If it's a place of I'm just blaming another person and having a go at them and da 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 da, it's like, I can appreciate how that might get me into more trouble, and maybe that's something I need to work on internally. But
mm,
yeah, if it's just coming from a place of like, this is my boundary, and I feel comfortable and safe when this is looked after, and is it possible for you to meet that? And if it's not, I'm maybe going to call you out on it and say, look, I already told you about this, and now it's coming up again. Like, what's going on with that? Ultimately, it's looking after myself.
yeah. So much of that resonates. I think it's funny, this idea about safety, because I was thinking about a time when I have spoken up before and it was unsafe, and
Mm,
um, there were repercussions for it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
Like serious repercussions, but it was my truth. Do you think that we should speak our truth regardless, or yeah? I suppose like not at the detriment of our own safety, obviously, but
Definitely not. Yeah.
yeah, how do you find the line? I guess.
I think we need to make sure we know who we're talking to. So,
Mm,
is this person someone who's able to hear me or not?
mm,
Is this person
yeah.
someone who's done the work or not? Is this someone who's very one-sided, blindsided, will always blame you for everything, regardless of what they do, and never take any responsibility? Like, if you're
Mm,
speaking your truth at someone who is not ready to hear it, they're just going to get defensive and block you. Whereas if you're speaking your truth to someone who is open to wanting to work with you to fix whatever it is that has come unbound, um, you're gonna be way more safe to be able to speak your truth. So it's like, I wouldn't just run in there and yell at anyone because of something that's happened, because I know that there'll be certain people who just match my energy and come in here yelling straight at me, and that's just going to hurt me and make it a worse relationship for me. So there'd be certain people I'd trust with my truth, and there'd be certain people I'd go, I don't know, you're in a maybe category, and maybe I'll just test the waters with something small and see how they go with that, the bite-sized piece of it. If they shut it down, if they don't like it, if they can't handle it, I go, okay, maybe you're not someone I can have these conversations with. And if you're someone who's just immediately always blaming and shaming and like never looking at yourself, I'm like, okay, I'm probably not going to try and repair this relationship because it's just going to get me into more wounding and more hurt and trauma from this other person. And I don't really want that for myself.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's like that finding your voice isn't necessarily always speaking your voice. It's like you value your truth and your voice so much that you will speak it when it will be heard, or you will ensure that it's like going to land
Mm,
in a way that it's held, I guess, as
yeah,
well. Like it's, yeah.
you can keep shoving your truth down people's throats, but if they're not open to it or if they're not ready for it, it's not going to go anywhere anyway. So, yeah,
Mm,
keeping it as
yeah.
that protection and looking after yourself at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah. And like treating it with the reverence that it deserves in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
It's very interesting though, always like hearing people's stories, because
Mm,
I think it's just so relatable. Like so many people go through this process of like losing their voice, and
yeah.
do you think that, like, did you have it before losing it?
Oh, that's a good question. Uh, the thing that comes to mind is when I was a 5-year-old, I wanted to be a singer. That was my favorite career path. And I loved being on stage. And by on stage, I meant like my lounge room, but I'd get all my aunties and uncles and I'd be like, I just want to do a show. I was like, so I just loved being the center of attention. I absolutely loved it. And then I got really bullied in like maybe prep and grade one. And suddenly I just completely shut down, shut that part of myself off entirely, and just became the quiet reader child. Uh, so I guess maybe when I was a kid, I might have had a bit more of a voice. And I actually distinctly remember I had a bit of a psycho best friend when I was 5 years old, which is wild. But anyway, I wouldn't usually term that for a 5-year-old, but here we are. Um, I have this memory of like being in kindergarten, right? Like one of my first memories of like this girl trying to boss me around and me saying like, no, I don't want to do that. And her punching me in the gut.
Wow.
Yeah. And just, I don't know if that was I don't think that was the moment that I fully shut down, but I just remember being like, oh my God, like I've tried to say no and look at the repercussions of that.
Yeah.
And like maybe that was where it started of like, it's scary to speak up. It's scary to speak my voice.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's so interesting.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, I have this real like feeling that like I've always like known that everyone has, it's like their inner self, like their inner badass self, and then it's like all
mm,
the things that happen to us that take that away, that cover it up. Not
yes.
take it away, it's always there, like all these layers of interference that happen that just
Mm,
bury us beneath, all this crap. And then we get to this point, hopefully we most of us get to this point where we start to then like take those layers off and
yeah.
like rediscovering who we were before all of this shit happened to us. And yeah, like that's our most authentic badass self.
Yeah, I'd love to share a story actually on that, if that's
Yeah.
okay. I had a realization the other day where I realized the root cause of my people pleasing. So, love my mother, no offense to my mother. I went through my emo phase like you did, where
Yeah.
you're trying to find yourself. You're like, I'm a bit emotional. Maybe I fit in with these people. Oh, wearing black and like emo music is so cool. And I'm wearing my black and I'm doing my thing. And my mum hated it. Like she thought I was going to be goth for life and like was very anxious and was freaking out. And you can't wear black. You can't wear black. You got to start wearing colors. You got to do this. Like it's going to be bad. Da, 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 da. Spiraled into a whole thing. And in the end, it became so exhausting for me to have to put up with that every day that I was like, fine, I'll wear your bloody colors. Like I'll give this up, this part of me. And there was other things going on with like friendship issues and things like that at the time as well that contributed. But the main thing I learned, my inner teenager learned from that experience, that in order to be lovable, I have to do what other people want me, or be who other people want me to be, right? I can't be myself, which is this emo person right now. That's who I was in my childhood years. I have to be a certain version of self in order to be lovable, and that version of self doesn't have a voice. And then I smack bang the next year got into my first abusive relationship where I couldn't speak for myself. I couldn't say no. I couldn't do any of the things because I'd learned that in order to be lovable in a relationship, I had to be a certain version of self with no voice.
Oh,
And it's like, fuck, that just started everything off, didn't it? Um, and yeah, and like I wouldn't take that back, because like the reason I'm a relationship coach today is because of that abusive relationship when I was younger, because I just needed to learn everything there was to know about like healthy relationships and why I couldn't get to one. Um, but yeah, it's fascinating that these belief systems that are ingrained in us from childhood just become so large in our adult lives. We're functioning from being kids, really.
yeah. And then I feel like it's also reinforced in once we become
Mm,
adults. It's like everyone's playing it out, and especially women. We have there's so many subtle ways that people tell us to stay small, to stay
yeah.
quiet. Like, even like I've heard of women being told that their voice is too high pitched,
Mm,
and like, in the workplace, and just
what?
yeah, like yeah, I know. I don't know why that came up. It was that was a weird
What a
story,
weird
but
thing to
yeah,
say to someone. Your
I
voice is
think
too high. Like,
that's
what are
why
you
it
supposed to
came to
do
me.
about that?
Yeah, well, that's why I came to it, because it's like that's such a like stupid thing, right? And
Mm,
it's ridiculous. But just imagine like how that woman felt to be
yes.
told like that your voice is the wrong pitch. Um, like to literally have your voice attacked.
Like you're not
And
being the version of
yeah,
who I want you to be with the right pitch. Like what?
yeah. Like if you're having to even think about how you project your actual voice, let
Mm,
alone all of those like childhood narratives and all of the systemic like oppression that we have, like wow, there's so
mm,
much
mm.
to battle against. Um, but yeah, like I guess like becoming aware of it allows us to overcome it,
Yeah,
and to call it out.
definitely. Because yeah, if you don't have that awareness, those kind of things, you're like, oh, that sucks that someone's told me that. But it's like you don't realize the level it might impact you on. You just think, oh,
Mm.
that person might be a weirdo. Like maybe I won't talk to them anymore. But it's like, oh, they've just tried to keep me small. And now am I not speaking up in meetings as much because I've got a thing about my voice all of a sudden? Like,
Yeah.
what are the repercussions of that comment? Like,
Mm.
and when we've been told to shut down our entire lives, uh,
Mm.
it will, yeah, you'll probably find it traces back to something else, and then it becomes a bigger thing than what it needs to be than just someone's opinion that day,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I think about, what are the next steps, if you're someone who's been listening to this episode and you really resonate with what we've shared today, and you feel like you also struggle with having a voice, um, where to start would be for me would be learning a somatic practice that's really great for regulating your nervous system. So, what does that mean if you're not in psychology speak? So, whenever we get into a situation that scares us, especially if it's like speaking up and you're not sure and you maybe have that fear of conflict, because a lot of people do, that's very normal. What can be really useful and helpful is having some grounding techniques or tools, whether it's mindfulness, breathing, going out in nature, like just something to regulate us and bring us back down to calm. I know in the moment when I'm talking to someone, if I'm freaking out, I'll try to breathe and just like deep breaths instead of shallow, anxious breaths. Um, because if you can kind of calm your nervous system that bit more, you're more likely to stay in your thinking brain as opposed to your like mammalian fight, flight, freeze brain, which means you're going to want to run, or I'm assuming you're not fight or shut down. Um, So yeah, having a practice that you can come back to, or maybe you've set the boundary and then you're panicking after that, like you've sent an edgy text message or something and you're not sure how they're going to respond. Like it's always good to have those practices to come back to just calm you down and go like it's going to be okay and just self-soothe. So that would be my number one. Then I would, yeah, maybe if it feels comfortable enough, just start testing the waters with people that you feel loved with, like someone who's not going to like hold it against you if you say no to them about something, or just try it and see what happens. And yeah, maybe they respond really well and you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that, but now I've got that evidence. So just whatever feels like the next babyest step to you would be like my next kind of what I would tell a client to do. Um, but also get support because this stuff is really hard and you need someone in your corner, I think, when you're going through this work to remind yourself that, that you've done nothing wrong and that you're just taking your next steps in your boundaries, and that's so fine. What about you, Lauren? Is there anything you would recommend as like next steps if you were someone who just come to this podcast and wanted to learn how to explore their voice?
I have to come back to the core values.
Mm,
Yeah, just working out what your like top 2 to 3 core values are, and then just like practicing and noticing like what comes up for you when you are acting in alignment with your values, and
yes.
what happens and comes up when you're out of alignment, and noticing that, and then yeah, practicing like then speaking in alignment with your values and noticing how that goes. And yeah, like you said, like just trying little baby steps. And yeah, and I think also, yeah, I agree, having support in that. So like practicing with a safe person. Um, for example, like, if one of your values is respect, like no, practicing like how you can show up more respectfully in that relationship, and
Yeah.
like noticing how that feels for you, because in my experience anyway, it feels so fucking good to
Mm-mm.
be doing something which is so in alignment with your soul. It
Yeah.
just, and like the ripple effects of doing that, it just like compounds and magnifies. The more you do it, the more aligned, like you just seek out things which are so in alignment with you, and then you find more and more, and you end up just like, I think that the end result is living a really soul purposeful, like it doesn't really make sense, but I think you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
this really aligned life.
They say the more you live by your values, the more happy you are in general as a person because you're doing what you want to be doing, right? Like you're not compromising, you're not live like in a job that you hate that you don't want to be at because it doesn't align with you at all because you chose a job that is related to your values. Like I think once you just jump on that journey of like trying to actually identify your values and follow them is like life changing in itself, like without all the rest of
Yeah,
this work. So yeah, thank you so
yeah.
much for sharing that. Is there anything else?
I think that is an amazing first step, and yeah, leads on to so many other things that you find along the way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think also uh, like finding other people who are on the same journey.
Yeah.
Like we met at that retreat. That was amazing. We did some pretty like crazy, scary things, which, like for example, like dancing on the beach, in like my fishnet stockings.
Yeah.
Like that was so scary for me. But like doing that with other women who were also on their own journeys and like in a
Mm.
safe space, like doing stuff, not saying that you have to do that. But for me, like just being with other women on a similar journey or who want similar things was
Yeah.
so powerful for me.
Definitely. I think it's so important to, yeah, have the community of like-minded people around you, like that you can talk to about this stuff and you can openly talk about boundaries and share about your experiences. And they get it. They know they've been there, they've heard about that stuff before, kind of thing.
Mm.
And speaking of which, we are running a women's circle this March 16th. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. March 16th in Berwick.
Berwick, yes. And we would absolutely love to extend an invite to anyone who's listened to this podcast and feels like it's really resonant. That would be a great way to come hang out with some like-minded people. Yeah, we would absolutely love to hold your hand in taking your first baby steps towards finding more of your voice, wherever that is. That might be at your values, that maybe you've never set a boundary in your life, and that's so fine and
Mm,
brilliant and perfect. Wherever you're at is so okay. But yeah, me and Lauren just absolutely love and are so passionate about this work that we feel like we need to share this with the world. Like women need to know this knowledge, and what better of a way than a women's circle to come together and really just share where we're at with our emotions about it all. Like maybe you set a boundary, it didn't go well. Maybe you just want to be like loved and supported on through that. We'll
mm,
also be doing a little bit of a practice in it as well. So you'll get to like just test the waters in a very safe environment where like we're not going to challenge you too far. Like as much as you can handle is so fine. And we're all practicing boundaries. It's not like it's a real life scenario. So yeah, so like it might be of use to you for you to just come along and just suss it out and see what it's like and go from there and meet some new friends maybe like I did at the retreat with Lauren. Yeah, you never know what's going to come out of a circle of women. Is there anything else you wanted to share on any of that?
yeah, just to add to that, yeah, there's nothing more powerful and magical than a group of women gathering together. It's just
Mm.
like it's so enriching. It fills your cup in ways that I always like never knew I needed it until I walk away from a gathering of women. So, um, yeah, I would love to see you there. If you're on the fence, just jump in. We've got you.
Beautiful. Yes, love that. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode today. Thank you so much for sticking with us if you have stayed with us this whole time. We are sending you much love and look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.
Bye.